Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, aka my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have kids and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Say it with me now. Aw Yeah. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and under new ownership since 2020, Moose sells a wide selection of comics from every publisher and time period, along with action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Filmmakers and movie fans alike should be sure to attend these film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and Round Reel in Bloomfield, New Jersey. Take it from an alum of 2 of them. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. We reference the television series Smallville a lot around here, and there's one Smallville rewatch podcast that's always at the top of my queue: Always Hold On to Smallville, hosted by our pal, Zach Moore. Zach and his guests bring tremendous insight, passion, and humor as they discuss each and every episode of the series that ushered in the renaissance of superhero TV. Listen to Always Hold On to Smallville wherever you get podcasts, and keep an eye out for the other shows under the Always Hold On to banner, including Arrow, DC's Legends of Tomorrow, Superman and Lois, and Star Wars. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This is our Rejected by New York Comic Con special, and joining me to discuss Superman, the Definitive History, is co-writer and returning guest Ed Gross, or should I say Edward?
You can say Edward, you can say Ed, whichever you prefer. And yes, I'm rejected too, so it's okay. Thanks. Good to be here again.
We'll get into the Rejected by New York Comic Con bit of business, but more importantly, this book that you have co-written, which releases on November 26th, 2024, just a few weeks after people will hear this episode, is such an astounding achievement. And I'm not just saying this because you're on the show and we've developed this friendship, but honestly, I had the opportunity to take a look at a PDF preview copy provided by your publisher, which I'm very appreciative of. And it was amazing to just scroll through that and see how comprehensive this material, this book is. And I guess let me just toss it to you. How did this come about? You've been on the show before. We've talked about your unofficial oral history of Superman, Voices from Krypton. So how do we go from that to this definitive history?
Well, I guess what it really is I went from writing what people have said, including Mark Waid, I'll plug it, I don't care, the definitive history of Superman in terms of what was an unofficial oral history in Voices from Krypton, to now doing the official definitive history, which is very strange because most people don't get an opportunity to write an unofficial history and then get to write or co-write the official. That's just not done. But it was, I think, because I had proven I knew my stuff with the first book, and Inside Editions was looking to turn this around pretty quickly. So obviously I had done interviews. I knew the subject. They reached out to me and asked if I was interested in doing this. And it's a very tight turnaround, basically. So, of course, I was, because I have realized that I could keep writing about Superman and not be bored of it. And in fact, I'm looking to do something else. So obviously that's a sign of insanity, I guess, that you could keep writing and writing and writing and never get tired of it. That's how I really initially joined the project. And my editor, Tim Pilcher, is like so enthusiastic about this. And his excitement was also not just the text of it, but finding images, finding the rare just production art, pre-production art, concept sketches, merchandise images, rare comic book art, PSA art. I mean, just an incredible selection that spans the 86-year history of this character. And that's the beauty of the difference between the two books too, is that, like, because mine was unofficial, it had no photos. This thing is loaded with photos, and it is. I mean, I cannot tell you how proud I am to have my name on both of these books. I mean, it's really astounding. So, and that's me going off on a tangent somewhere, but that's sort of how that came together.
Yeah, it's really something that you had the opportunity to do both versions of a Superman history book. And the book is available for pre-order already on Amazon and wherever books are sold. The suggested retail price is $175. As of this recording, I saw it listed for $157 on Amazon, so you can save a little bit. All I'll say is this. I have the digital copy. I will be purchasing a physical copy of this book, and I look forward to displaying it proudly on the coffee table next to me. I envision this as something that not only will I read through more thoroughly and kind of just flip through for enjoyment, but I also see this as something that I, as host of this podcast, will use as a reference moving forward, because it's it's such a resource. And there are things that are covered here, things that represent some of the few remaining gaps in my fandom, like when we talk about the radio show or the musical or the audio dramatizations and things like that. And I know I'll be checking out those chapters again when I get to that on the podcast. So it's something that I envision spending a lot of time with in the years to come.
And I think that was the intent. I really do think, I mean, it was certainly the intent on the first book, but with this book, especially because it's so visual, and it is you say you're going to put it on your coffee table. I mean, I don't know where else you would put it. I mean, this thing is 15 pounds, a slipcase cover, the size, the dimensions are huge. But look at me plugging this thing, but you're right. It is so comprehensive that I think you will be doing exactly that. I mean, I'll be doing that because, I mean, it was written in such a blur that, going back to it now, it's going to be like, wow, we wrote that, because, Robert Greenberger and I co-wrote it. And, looking at it now, and even in the PDF version, because I'm still waiting for my final version of the book to show up. So I have not seen the finished thing outside of a video that was sent to me. It really is quite the resource, and it is quite the achievement, I think. I mean, it really is for someone who's grown up on this character to have that is just incredible. I mean, it's just like, I don't know where Superman goes from here. Yes, we've got this new movie and season 3 of My Adventures with Superman and all that, but to have everything encapsulated in this one book is just wonderful as a fan. I mean, forget the fact that I co-wrote it.
No, absolutely. So again, congratulations. I hope everyone checks out the book. I want to talk more about the process of writing the book, the overall experience, the organization of the finished product. I want to talk a good bit about Superman fandom generally, this idea that I know you've talked about a lot of following the S. Curious about how you first developed that idea, how you've nurtured it over the years, times when you've been tested and that's been challenged, how you've done it, how you can teach me how to do it. I'm almost there, but sometimes I do still struggle a little bit. But as I said at the top, this is our Rejected by New York Comic Con special. So let's give the people what they want and talk about the fact that I submitted a panel to New York Comic Con on our behalf that would have been called Following the S. And we would have talked about your book, but more generally, the history and evolution of Superman and what it means to be a Superman fan and what it means to follow the S. And I submitted it to ReadPop, the convention organizer that puts on New York Comic Con and C2E2 and a bunch of other shows. And alas, we were rejected. And I was going through my old emails because I haven't kept a running tally of how many times I've been rejected by ReadPop, but
God, good. I'm glad you haven't.
It was more than once. It's been a good number of times. Now, I could easily do an hour on this, and I'm not going to, and I don't want to. And I don't want anything that I'm about to say to sound like sour grapes or anything like that. I understand they get probably thousands of submissions. I can only imagine how they are inundated with people wanting to have panels at the show. I can appreciate how time and space are so limited there. I get all of that. Nevertheless, I have some thoughts and feelings that I'll get off my chest, but let me just give you the floor for the moment. Is there anything you want to share about this? I was going to say experience, but maybe lack of experience getting to do this panel.
I guess I'm a little more pragmatic about it in the sense of I really wanted to do it. And I think it would have been a lot of fun. And I think for anybody attending it would have been very informative because both of us, I think, are so vested in this history of this character. I mean, you through the podcast, and I mean, your own fandom, but I mean, this podcast has allowed you to explore so many different aspects of this thing. And I listen to it and it's like, I'm amazed at the depths in which you've gone over the years covering this, which is amazing. And my own research and history with this character. So it would have been, I think, a very exciting panel to present. And I think it would have been fun. That being said, I handle it much more pragmatically because my feeling about it is, it's like I attended Superman Celebration and this year, and the comments I got from people, and I think you've referred to me or other people have when I've appeared on their podcast, started referring to me as a Superman historian. And it's like, all right, I can accept that title. That's, I consider how much I've covered the character and the books I've written. And it's like, okay, I'll accept the title of not in an obnoxious way, but I'll accept the title of Superman historian, given, a good deal of knowledge that I have and that sort of thing. So my feeling is, okay, I didn't get to appear at New York Comic Con, but I've got Voices from Krypton and I've got Superman, the definitive history. And if that's what I've got to represent this, then that's not so bad. I was just disappointed, but I moved on. I mean, it's like, it's not to me, a thing that's going to get me like to stay angry at. I've done conventions. I've done that sort of thing. I was at Superman Celebration and that to me was, I was on stage there. So that was exciting.
No, that's a very healthy way of looking at it. And you're right. I mean, I have this podcast. It's not like I'm wanting for a space to talk about this character. I certainly do enough of it. I think where maybe my frustration comes into play, this will be a little bit of therapy for me for a minute here. I wonder how many of the panels that ultimately make it are kind of cold submissions through the panel application process. For example, we know a lot of the panels are major publishers and studios, and are they even necessarily submitting panels, or is it more calling up Repop and saying, hey, like we're going to have a panel and we're going to announce Hush 2? I mean, I don't know the behind the scenes of that, but whether they go through the process or not, again, I genuinely wonder, I guess, sort of how open this process really is in terms of how many of these quote unquote cold submissions really actually make it through. I just kind of wonder about that. I have described this to you as I feel like New York Comic Con in particular for me is just this nut that I've been unable to crack. And the thing that kind of broke me with New York Comic Con was their 2020 convention. This was height of COVID. This was the virtual convention. And you might be shocked to hear they ran out of space at their virtual convention for me too. But what broke my heart about that was this was right around the time I was releasing my documentary film, My Comic Shop Country, and I had this whole panel pitch about how retailers were weathering the struggles and demands of COVID, right? And they were implementing all of these innovations. And one of the panelists I had lined up was legendary comics creator and part owner of the Aw Yeah group of stores, Mark Waid. And I figured, man, if ever there were a time, it's the height of COVID, stores are struggling, we want to shine a light. We've got this documentary coming out. We've got Mark Waid lined up. It's a virtual con. And, I was told no, thank you. So that kind of broke me a little bit.
Yeah, that's rough.
To the point where I was like, I don't know that I would ever do it again. But we've been doing this podcast here now for a while. And I figured like, all right, man, this is an opportunity. And I figured I have Edward Gross, co-writer of Superman, the Definitive History. But no.
I said I consider myself a historian. I don't know if other people do.
No, but more than that, and this goes beyond pinning it on you or me as this podcaster, but I thought that there was an opportunity to really spotlight Superman. This was the last New York Comic Con before the movie. And it just felt like this could have been a great opportunity to share what we love about this character with fellow fans and maybe new fans, maybe people who have never gotten into the character or have been out of the character for a while, but they're kind of curious about the movie. And I guess where I get kind of a little bit further disillusioned with this is that putting myself aside, right? Like if they had another similar type of Superman panel and they just had someone else do it, yeah, I'm sure I'd feel some sort of way about that, but like I would get it. And at least I would feel like, okay, they're honoring the character and they're doing something like this. Going back to that virtual con, if they had done something on retailers and it just wasn't me, it's like, okay, that's fine. Like still do. So I think it's kind of twofold. There's a little bit of, hey, I didn't get in, but it's also, I genuinely feel, but clearly my interests and my preferences don't align with what they see for their show. I get that. But it just felt like for both of those conventions, hey, there was an opportunity to do something here. And, again, that wasn't reciprocated. And so it goes. And the other thing too is, they don't give you any feedback other than the form email that says, we loved your idea. You should submit again.
Yeah. We can reject it again next year. Right. Exactly.
Yeah. And it's funny because I spent many years working in law school admissions. And similarly, we would not give individualized application feedback. However, one distinction is that there, at least, we have median LSAT and GPA scores that we look for. And those aren't the only application factors, but at least someone who is wondering, like, why didn't I get in? Well, okay, there are at least some objectively verifiable standards that you can kind of look to and compare to your own. Here,
right.
And again, I know there's no way they could give individualized feedback. I get that. But part of me says to myself, was a Superman panel just never in the cards, or could we have tweaked it in some way that would have made it appealing to them? And I just don't know.
You never had the
we'll
opportunity.
Right.
I mean, I have a friend who, as I contacted you as the convention was approaching, and now this guy, and I don't want to mention his name, but he usually does a dozen panels at New York Comic Con, at San Diego Comic Con, at WonderCon. He's doing panels all the time. And he had a panel that was going awry and it looked like it was going to be canceled. So he said to me, he goes, hey, if you and Anthony, if I could slip you in for this panel that's going to be canceled, would you guys do it? And both of us, of course, left at the possibility. But it was a very, very slim possibility. And as it turned out, he went to Comic-Con with it, and he didn't even pitch the idea. He says, I have a replacement panel. It's like, no, we have a long line of panels ahead of you, so no, forget it. And this is a guy who does dozens of panels every year. And he couldn't even say what it was. He was rejected before he could say it because they had people lined up that had been rejected already. So I really don't know what the process is, but I'm disappointed as much as I'm pragmatic about it, but I'm also disappointed we didn't get the opportunity to do it. Especially like you said, there's no explanation for it. And that is the worst part of it. You're not given a reason for why it was rejected.
Yeah. I mean, in terms of what you submit, for anyone who's curious, a few months in advance of the convention, ReedPop will open up their panel application form on the website. Relatively short and straightforward. You enter your contact info, the proposed title and description, and list of panelists, and you answer a few other questions. Is it for adults only? Do you have any technical requirements? Things like that. It really only takes a few minutes, and then that's it. And then for this cycle, notifications went out on August 23rd. And that was the date they said notifications were going to go out. And it came through, I double checked my inbox at 4:46 p.m. So when it's notification day and we're that deep into the afternoon, that's it. That's it. We're going to send this out before we leave for the day and not worry about any people emailing back, sort of thing. But that's sort of the deal. And on I guess two positive notes. One, I posted on social media that we were going to do this Rejected by New York Comic Con special, and a lot of people commented and they expressed their disappointment and frustration that we weren't getting to do this. And I very much appreciate all of that. And for anyone who maybe is a little bit more well-versed in the behind the scenes of a convention, you might be thinking, like, who is this guy think he is? Like, to do a panel. It's like, I believe me, I know there's a lot going on and all of that, but I appreciate the kind words that everyone shared. And I guess I did have a good takeaway from all of this because I opted not to go to the convention. And I don't want to make it sound like I was so outraged, but that would have been my reason to really go. And absent that, I was just kind of like, forget it. But, there were a bunch of people, guests who have been on the show and audience members who reached out, who asked if I was going to go. And I said to myself, you know what, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. Like, you didn't get to do a panel. You still could have gone, right, and had a good time. And so This might change, but sort of the idea I have for next year's New York Comic Con, I don't think I'm going to try again with a panel, but I do intend to go and at least for one day and try to organize some sort of digging for kryptonite meetup, even if it's just for like a minute at the DC booth and we take a picture or
Good for
something like
you.
that.
That's a great idea.
So that's my takeaway, because it's like, you know what? That's the aspect of this that would probably be more meaningful and more memorable anyway. So we'll talk more about that when the time comes. But that's the whole rejected by New York Comic Con piece of this.
Hey, at Superman Celebration, they do that every year, like Superman Super Site. Neil Cole does that every year. They have in the first day, they have a Superman Super Site meetup. And it's a very popular thing. I mean, I haven't gone to it because it's so crowded. But it's like at a local restaurant, Fat Eddie's, it's called. They have this area where it's just packed with people who are attending this thing. So these things are very popular, you know, and I think it's a great idea. I really do.
Yeah, and Superman Celebration, that's another thing that is on the list, and I do hope to get there sooner rather than later, whether it's this coming year or the following one. So, yeah, hopefully we'll have some opportunities to kind of meet up with some of this amazing community that we've grown here.
It's fun. It's a lot of fun.
So, I guess just to kind of set the table for the audience, the idea for this episode isn't to do exactly what we would have done had we been on stage. I think had we been on stage and in theory talking to maybe new Superman fans or lapsed Superman fans, I think maybe we would have leaned a little bit more into the historical side of the character. Maybe. I think as we've been getting closer to this recording, what I've kind of had more on my mind really is this idea of the fandom, being a Superman fan, nurturing that, ways in which it's challenged. And so kind of on that note, like, let me talk to you. And I know this has come up when you've been on the show before, but now we can really, really sink our teeth into this idea of following the S. What does it mean? And when did this first kind of come to you?
What it means is that when people, and, you know, frequently, I just did like a library talk this past week and it came up again when people said, you know, who's your favorite Superman? And it's usually that question gets asked. And my automatic answer is Christopher Reeve, and that's always followed by, I follow the S. And when people give me the look like, well, what does that mean? And what it means is no matter who's playing Superman, I follow the S. If it's on TV, if it's in the movies, if it's in comic books, if it's whatever it is, if it's Supergirl wearing the S until the show got to be a little too much for me and then I had to stop watching. I am just, what the character represents is so strong for me that I want to go with it. Now, it's not on the same level, but it's strong, is like James Bond to me. It's like I grew up with Sean Connery as James Bond. Oh, Sean's not doing it anymore. Roger Moore's playing James Bond. I mean, George Lazenby also, but that's one shot. Roger Moore, Pierce Brosnan, Timothy Dalton, Daniel Craig, whatever. It's like, okay, I'm going along with the ride of James Bond. So it's similar, but Superman, it's a much deeper feeling about that. As to when that happened, I mean, it just happened over time in the sense of, you know, my first Superman was George Reeves in reruns of Adventures of Superman. And then, you know, watching the Filmation cartoon New Adventures of Superman, it's like, oh, here's another version of Superman. And somewhere in between there, discovering the comic books. So realizing, oh, there are comic books based on this TV show, Adventures of Superman. And it's like, how cool is that? You know, not realizing, being 6 or 7 years old, that it was the other way around. Then Super Friends came in 73, and it's like I didn't like that version because it was stupid. Sorry for you Super Friends fans out there. I think you like Super Friends, but as a 13-year-old, I was just like, I don't need the Wonder Twins. Thank you very much, or whoever they were, or, you know, Wendy and Marvin and Wonder Dog. And then we got It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman with David Wilson and stuff, which was really bad. But then Christopher Reeve showed up. But what I realized was, as disappointed as I was with Super Friends, I still watched, not every episode, but frequently would watch episodes. I still watched late, you know, It's a Bird, It's a Plane. And then Christopher Reeve showed up. And basically, I just realized, I think around Reeve's time, and then with anything that followed, it became more about just the character. Wherever Superman was showing up, I found myself going. So if it was on TV, if it was a cartoon, if it was on the big screen, whatever it was, I wanted to be there. And it's like, and that goes all the way up to the present, you know, Henry Cavill, you know, look, I have ever since we did the Snyderverse show, we did the one on the Snyder Cut. I did had a reappreciation for the trilogy, so I've appreciated much more about what was done with that. Still have my issues, but when they said Henry Cavill wasn't doing it anymore, it's like, no, that's sad. All right, David Cornsweet. Okay, I'll see you next summer, David. And that's really my philosophy about it. It's like, it's just the character means that much to me. The S means that much to me that I'm there for whatever it is, and I hope you don't screw it up. And that's really what it comes down to for me.
I mean, I think that's a very, a very healthy outlook on all of this. It's interesting because over these past few years, I've come to find that virtually any telling of this legend has its pocket of fans to varying degrees of size. I've yet to really encounter like a group of Kirk Allen fans. Every now and then someone will kind of like speak up on Kirk Allen's behalf, but I don't know that there's necessarily a groundswell of support for that version.
It's pretty obscure. The serials are pretty obscure.
But virtually everything else, and we can rattle them off, but I think everyone knows what we're talking about, they have their fans. And I mean, particularly with my side podcast project on the George Reeves series, I've really gotten a lot more familiar with that group of fans. And one of the things you hear a lot from them, I see it in the Facebook groups that I'm a part of, and I hear it from some of the folks who come on here. And it's not like, especially the guests who have come on that podcast, it's not like they're militant about it, but it's really like George was the guy, right? And
sure.
And like that's it. And it kind of begins and ends with him. And yeah, some of them have watched other iterations, but it's just kind of like they only ever get so far. And who are we to kind of prescribe what kind of fan people should be, right? They can have just the one that they follow. But I think for both of us, kind of being able to go on that journey with the character, there's something really rich and rewarding about that because you just open yourself up to all of this. I guess I don't even know how to phrase this. I don't know if this is going to be the best worded question, but kind of this go with the flow approach that you've kind of laid out. Do you ever find that let me put it this way. Do you feel like you're still able to get really excited about something? Because as you were describing, like, you gotta go with the S, like it feels, for lack of a better word, like kind of lackadaisical, nice, like in a nice way. But do you find that ever limits, again, like how charged up you can get about something? If that makes sense.
No, I can say absolutely not, because now there are some that they're going to be stronger than others. I mean, there's no question. But if you go to the opening episode of Superman and Lois, for instance, and Superman grabs the car and saves the kid, right? And he returns the kid's hat to him. And the kid says, "Hey, nice outfit." And he goes, "Thanks. My mom made it for me," and just gives this warm smile and then shoots straight up in the air. I get a charge out of that just watching, because it feels like Superman, right? I can watch my adventures with Superman, and he gets in front of this robot or whatever it was that was firing at Lois and is like destroying his clothes and stuff. And she says, "You didn't know you were bulletproof." And he says, "No, but I knew you weren't." Those moments, that gets me charged up, seeing something like that. Brandon Routh coming out as Kingdom Come Superman in Crisis on Infinite Earths, and to the John Williams theme, I'm like a child on Christmas watching that with that face all lit up and the excitement, my neck, the hair on my neck standing up. I mean, just thrilled with that, right? Henry Cavill comes out in the Black Adam teaser, right? It's tag. It's 2 seconds in the thing. And I remember Zack Snyder, when I told him about it, because he says he hadn't seen it, made fun of it. Like, it was like, oh, such stupid, going to the John Williams theme and that kind of thing. I looked at that. And again, I was thrilled with it, right? They announced David Corenswet. I was thrilled. They're making a new Superman movie. So yeah. And every time you hear the John Williams theme, I still get excited for it. The other day, I played it, I think 2 or 3 times, like in a loop. And I was so charged listening to it. And people have said to me when I finished the first book and the second book, it was like, you never want to hear the name Superman again, right? And I was like, are you kidding me? The first thing I do is put on the John Williams theme when these things are done, because that to me is sort of the rallying music for it. So all of these things, that even if I'm picking moments, but that's just symbolic of the fact that I'm still excited about every one of these things, as long as they're good. I mean, sometimes you're going to watch it and go, and it was kind of like how I used to feel about some of the James Bond movies. Like, you'd get my friend Jay Starr and I would go to the movies and we'd see them And if it was bad, our attitude at the end of it wasn't like, well, that sucked, we're never going to see another Bond movie. It was like, we'll get it right next time. And we'd walk out and talk about it, and they get it right next time, maybe, and hopefully, and that kind of thing. This Superman is like that, though, and usually they get it pretty right, or I feel like they did anyway, or I'll talk myself into the fact that I think they got it right, even if they didn't.
No, that's beautiful though that you still have that. You mentioned the John Williams theme, and look, this is an episode to kind of delve into some of these maybe more nerdy fanboy questions. This is something that Zach Moore from Always Hold On to Smallville and I have talked about, and if I'm not mistaken, he might have even brought this up with you when you were on his show. But one of the ideas that we've bounced around is the John Williams score. Is it the theme for the Christopher Reeve movie series, or is it just the theme for Superman at this point? Do you have a feeling on that?
My feeling is that it has become the theme for Superman, and part of the reason I feel that way is whenever they do a documentary or people do a fan tribute or something, and they do a montage, and the montage has all the different Supermen in it from the decades. It is to the John Williams theme usually, and it plays beautifully. And it captures every one of those actors playing that character. To me, it is like the James Bond theme. It doesn't matter who is playing James Bond. That theme encapsulates 007. I think, like, now, if James Gunn wants to, he's going to obviously do what he's going to do. We have no idea if he's going to use it. If you want to use elements of the John Williams theme, every now and then slip it at dun, 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 great. Then wonderful. We get a taste of it. The audience gets a rise, right? I mean, again, that's that Black Adam tag. We didn't get much of the Williams theme. We just got a little bit of it, but it was enough to get people excited. You know what I mean? And so, that's my feeling about it. It's that it captures the character in a beautiful way, that as great as like the Hans Zimmer theme is and all that stuff and all these other themes have been, nothing captures Superman the same way or says Superman to people in general. I don't think there's anybody who hears that theme and doesn't think Superman, and not necessarily Christopher Reeve. They just think Superman. What's your feeling about it?
Historically, I've been in the camp of it's the theme for the Christopher Reeve movie series, and each iteration should have its own. My stance, I guess big picture remains the same, but my stance has softened on it, and I am much more open now to, as you said, elements or a remixed or rearranged version. I guess the idea of it just coming on like full blast in its original version, it's like, we could do something with it. So I guess I like some sort of twist on it. But if aspects of it are there, and I always go back to the Krypton TV show where they used it sparingly, but to great effect, I thought. So I think there's a way to use it. You mentioned Brandon Routh, like yourself, is so happy when he returned as Superman in Crisis. And it seems like you've developed a bit of a rapport with him over the years. He wrote the introduction for Superman, The Definitive History. And I enjoyed it a lot because he talked about how he's been able to take a more holistic view of his experience as the character. And regardless of how you feel about Superman Returns, he seems like a great guy. And I always felt, and my appreciation for that movie has grown a lot, especially as a dad, but I kind of always felt for him in terms of, I think he did exactly what was asked of him. And there was this promise of so much more that never came to fruition, and his career went in a different direction. And then it all came back around, and he had this amazing moment of redemption in Crisis. I mean, I feel like if there's one aspect of Crisis that like everybody can rally around, I feel like it's him as Superman. So what have your interactions with him been like over the years?
Well, it's funny. I mean, it started off, of course, like anybody else, just an interview. And then I remember he was promoting Dylan Dog at WonderCon, whatever year that was, 2016, 2017, I forget what it was. And I said to him, I asked if I can get 10 minutes with him alone, one-on-one, to just talk about Superman Returns. Because, nobody had really done much in the way of looking back at Superman Returns. And I had done a phone interview with Bryan Singer about it, actually. So they said yes. And I sat down with him and we talked for the 10 minutes. And I'm not one of those guys that ever, ever, ever goes for photos with people. I just believe the audio is my keepsake. That's always been my driving force as a journalist. It's like, I don't need a photo with the person. Although in retrospect, I kind of wish I had photos with all the people I've interviewed, but I'm happy I did it the way I did it. And like I said, I've got the audio, and that's the keepsake. But I said to him, I go, listen, I said, I hate to ask this. I never asked this, but dude, you're Superman. I said, can I get a picture with you? And he, of course, was gracious and said yes. So we did that, and that was very nice. And then there was a follow-up phone interview. I think about him playing the Atom. I believe that's what it was. And then and then at Superman Celebration in 2018, he was one of the guests, and I was able to get like 15 minutes with him. So again, we had another nice conversation about Superman, what it represents, the fact that he was there, and the love that people obviously had for him, and he was very touched by it. I remember that very specifically. He was very moved by it and all. And then when Voices from Krypton came up, and I wanted him to write the forward, and he was a little hesitant. I did an interview. He was the last interview I got for the book. When I got him, and his people said he'll do. I said, would he do either an interview or the forward? And they said, well, he'll do the interview. So we did the interview on Zoom, and it was really good. We were on the phone for like an hour and a half. And as towards the end, I go, Brian, I know I'm not supposed to ask, but I'm going to ask you anyway. Given the nature of this conversation, I was wondering, is there any shot that you would consider doing the forward? He goes, let me think about it for a couple of days and I'll let you know. And he said yes. And he wrote a beautiful forward to that book, which is very different from the intro he did to the definitive history. And so he ended up doing both. And then this year's Superman Celebration, it was just very nice. I gave him he hadn't gotten a copy of the book Voices. So I gave him VFK there. And they were waiting for him to take a picture, and I hadn't seen him yet. He was signing autographs. And it was nice because it's right as they say, Brandon, we need to take a picture. So-and-so's leaving. All the celebrities, they wanted a group picture. And he goes, I'm coming. He goes, I got to say hello to Ed first. And he came over to me, gave me a nice big hug and stuff. But he was the kind of guy that I watched him interact with people, and he was so genuine. And there was somebody, a young man suffering from cerebral palsy, and he just took the time to, not suffering, that's not the right word, but he had cerebral palsy. And Brandon crouched down and was just talking to him. And the man just seems to embody so many of the ideals of what he played as Superman. And I'm not saying I don't want it to come across like I'm saying, oh, Brandon walks around like he thinks he's Superman. I'm not saying that. But he believes in so many of the humanistic aspects of Superman. And he speaks it. And he gets very emotional talking about it. It obviously means something to him. The fact that, he played the character, playing the character touched him, and the fact that his portrayal touched so many people who convey that back to him. And in my conversations with him, that has been conveyed to me. And it's just so, I know it's a long answer to your question about the relationship, but it's such a wonderful sense you get from him in talking to him. And I enjoy every time I talk to him. It's just this great back and forth, and just, he's so genuine, and that's what I think I really like about it. So, so it's just great. So, and I'm glad he got that opportunity with Crisis, because I know he is. He's, we can look on the outside in and say, oh wow, that's great, he got to play Superman. But for him, I really do think it was like, if he never gets that opportunity again, he had this, and he knows that everybody loved it, like you said. So, pretty wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, that's great to hear. I'm glad those have been the interactions you've had. I'm glad that he's felt the love from fans. I admire his thoughtfulness when you asked him about writing the forward, that he wanted to give it some time and get back to you. It wasn't just a shoot from the hip, yes or no. He gave it a lot of thought. I mean, it's still crazy to me that I know we're winding down on the Arrowverse by the time Crisis rolled around, but for all of the shows and all of the spinoffs and the streaming content on HBO Max and then Max, it's like, was there no spot for something with him as the...
They could have done with him, right? That was the rumor, that Max would have done something with him, right?
Yeah. So circling back, though, to this following the S idea, have you encountered instances where, even with this approach ingrained in you and you've developed it over all these years, have you encountered instances where you have been challenged, where you've been tested in this, where you want to follow, but you feel like you can't? There's some sort of roadblock to you getting on board with a new iteration?
Look, I mean, Superboy in the beginning, I had a lot of problems with the Superboy TV show, and I grew to appreciate what they were trying to get closer to the comics, and then I started enjoying it more. But in those first season, I guess that first season was pretty rough, and I had I was trying to watch it every Saturday. I think it was in syndication, and I was trying to watch it, and it was tough. I mean, getting through it, it really was. And again, I mentioned it before, those Super Friend cartoons variations, because they would shake it up till they got to like Galactic Guardians. Then Galactic Guardians was at least, for me, watchable, basically. I can enjoy those, actually. And I was like, "Ooh, this is pretty good. Okay, this is not bad." But I'm trying to think if there are any that I could really look at and say, "Eesh," that I really couldn't get behind, because I mean, think about it. It's really Lois and Clark. I had some issue. I know that's one of your cornerstones of Superman to some degree, but to me, that show got very silly. It started off so strong, and I felt it got further away from really focusing on the romance of Superman and Lois, Clark and Lois, I should say, and got more involved with the supervillains and the superheroics, which they did not have the budget for. It got sillier, and the villains got sillier, and the show, for me, lost whatever it had in that first season, where they were still trying to deal with a lot of the Kryptonian stuff in a good way, though, not in the silly way. And I'm not saying it didn't have some good episodes, but it became harder for me to watch that show as it went on. That one became more of a slog for me to say, this is silly, and they're doing things they can't afford to do, and it looks terrible. Smallville, for the most part, we've talked in the past about what the strengths and weaknesses were, as far as I'm concerned. I'm not talking about the finale, but that overall it was an incredible accomplishment for 10 years. Although the teen angsty thing that made it hard for me at certain points, it was just like, enough. Move forward.
I don't know what you're talking about. That show was perfect from start to finish. Now, I had my own issues with it as well, even though it's still my favorite.
I want to know how many times somebody got thrown across the room into a table. That's what I want to know. I want to count with that. It's kind of like taking how many people John Wick killed in a movie. That's what I want to know. How many people got thrown across the room into a table? But really, when I think about it, there aren't too many that I can look at it and sit there and go, "Oh yeah, that was pretty terrible." I'm not saying they all brought the same level of excitement, but how many? I mean, for you, what's sort of sluggish for you? If sluggish is a word, I just made up.
Well, we're living through it right now. So actually, one of the reasons why I asked this question is it's something I have been wrestling with myself a little bit. And
okay, I should have thought of this. That's right. Go ahead.
So this does not fall into the category of it's terrible, I'm really struggling, but. As we are recording this, we are in the midst of the fourth and final season of the CW's Superman and Lois, and they are doing a version of the death and return of Superman. And literally, as of this recording, I've seen the first 4 episodes. I've got episode 5 waiting for me with my Amazon Prime season pass, and I'm going to watch it when we're done.
Same with me. I'm 4 episodes in.
But I'm kind of having some issues. And we're going to do a whole episode on the entire season when it's done. So I don't want to kind of jump the gun too much. And I don't want to spoil too much for people who maybe are not current. But again, the fact that they're doing a takeoff on the death and return of Superman, I think that's really common knowledge at this point. So I don't think we're spoiling anything. And I've how do I put this? I've had to check myself a few times because I say to myself, are the critiques that I feel, are they justified? Is it just, it's not how I would do it, right? And then I have to remind myself, it's not your show. Like, you're not a writer on the show. It's not your thing. Because there is a little bit of that where it's like, I would have done this, I would have done that. A mutual friend and veteran podcaster, Michael Bailey, I've been following his posts on social media, and he's been reviewing the show for Superman homepage. And I wish I were having the experience with this season that he is. Honestly, he seems to be getting so much out of it. And one of the things that I know he's been particular about, and his point is well taken, though I don't 100% agree, and we can have that healthy disagreement. It's all right. He's been quick to point out it's not a quote unquote adaptation, right? So they're going to make changes. They're going to do their own thing. I guess from my perspective, I understand that point. At the same time, I feel like there are some kind of core intrinsic aspects of a story involving Superman dying at the hands of Doomsday. And to me, some of those core qualities are Superman sacrificing his life in the process of actually stopping Doomsday, as well as Doomsday himself being this force of nature. And we're recording this the same day that my interviews with Mike Carlin and Dan Jurgens came out. And like we taught, like this was the whole thing when they were cracking this story at their super summit, right? It had to be this force of nature, not a puppet of Luthor, where Lex just gets one over on him. And I really hope I'm going to have a completely different tune by the time the season is done. And I'm optimistic that the show will stick the landing. It's done a great job in the past. But to me, even if it's not a direct literal adaptation, fine. But I still feel like there are certain qualities that they have neglected. And I don't feel like they have mined the, for a show that is so personal and so emotional, I feel like they have left a lot on the table and a lot has happened a lot faster than I would have liked and I would have expected. And this last thing, and then I want to hear your take on all of this. The last thing is, this is the most fanboyish aspect of this, but God damn it. It's like if ever we were going to get a live action television version of Reign of the Supermen, it's this show. We had a Superboy, we had a Steel, we had Tal Rho could have been Eradicator, Tyler Hoechlin could play Cyborg, he could also play Eradicator. It's like you finally had all of the pieces in place and we didn't go there. Which again, that might fall into the category of, hey, it's not my show, relax. But anyway, I find I'm struggling a little bit as a Superman fan. And I feel like this is, for me, like Death and Return of Superman. It's what got me into this, and I feel so strongly about it. And I'm kind of having a hard time.
Well, I don't know how spoilery. How spoilery can I get with this? I don't know.
That's a good question. I guess if you're listening to this and you're not current on Superman and Lois and you're playing, I don't know, skip ahead 60 seconds, go for it.
Or something. Okay, because you're right. I mean, I guess I blocked this out of my mind. That's not good. Because I will say that Superman and Lois seasons 1 through 3, I have been so amazed at how good this show has been and how it has landed emotionally and on the superhero level in so many ways and so successfully that they've nailed it. And I've been so impressed with it. This season, when they ended on what I call the Rocky 3 shot with Doomsday and Rocky Superman coming towards each other, we knew what was going to happen. First of all, I didn't like the fact that Doomsday didn't die in the battle. I mean, with Superman. I mean, the whole point is Superman dies, Doomsday dies. I mean, he sacrifices himself to kill Doomsday, but that didn't happen. I've got a problem with that. The death of Superman himself, yes, initially we get the emotion of it, but it kind of goes away after that first episode. We're not really feeling bad that Superman's not around. It's more like we're talking about Superman not being around, but we're not feeling his absence, and I obviously not going to do World Without a Superman because there's no time or budget to really do it, but there's no sense of it basically. And then things are just happening so fast and there is no emotional connection with it when General Sam Lang, ends up dying at some point. It's like, okay, that's sad. We should feel more when he dies, and we don't. When Superman resurrects, we should be like, yes, Superman's back. And I kind of don't. And I should be feeling more of that. And, Luthor manipulating the boys and making, Jonathan feel bad. And was it Jonathan or what? I don't know. Jordan, making Jordan feel bad, making it seem that Lois didn't care about him and that sort of thing. It's like, that's okay. Kind of soap opera-ish to me. But the emotions of a lot of the stuff isn't landing this season because I feel like we've got 10 episodes. We've got to do all this stuff. We've got to end the show. And that's a problem because you're trying to do so much. And I don't like the fact that, okay, Superman's back. And I guess this is just guesswork on my part, that it's going to be Superman and the Super Sons battling Doomsday and finally stopping Doomsday at the end, maybe. Who knows? But I don't like the fact that that like a dog, he's just hanging out waiting for Luthor to sick him on somebody. And then Superman's back, and it's like, what makes you think Doomsday's not just going to kill him again? And yes, you've got the Super Sons now, and we'll see. But there's nothing there that feels like genuine emotion, genuine threat, genuine anything. It's just, it has become more superficial than the show was in its first 3 seasons. I guess that's the best way to put it. And that's really bothersome for a show that was amazing.
I agree. It's like, if ever there were a show built to do this story justice, it's Superman and Lois. And I just don't feel thus far that they've capitalized on it. And yes, to your point, like I'm sure there's going to be a rematch and hopefully it'll be really satisfying. But I feel like there's a lot they've left on the table already. I mean, it's funny when Mike Carlin was on here and he was talking about how their original plan for Superman's return, it would have culminated in Adventures 500 after he has his afterlife experience with Jonathan, and then he would have woken up. And he's like, we realize you can't just have him wake up, right? And yeah, because now we've seen that play out. And yeah, there's something I think that it leaves something to be desired when you kind of blow through it that quickly. So, and the last thing I'll say, and I don't mean to beat up on poor Michael Bailey. I respect his position a lot, but I guess I feel like I think about that 2-part Justice League animated episode Hereafter where Superman seemingly dies in that battle against the Injustice League with that Toyman weapon that seemingly vaporizes him. And then he's in the future with Vandal Savage. Like, it's great stuff. There, though, he dies in a different way. I don't necessarily look at that. It's obviously touching on themes of the death and return of Superman, but I look at that as more of its own thing. I do feel like if you're going to do a story where Superman dies at the hands of Doomsday, right, even if it's not a literal adaptation, I think there are, certain expectations or certain deliverables that fans, I think, rightfully are going to look for. So anyway, we'll see kind of how it shakes out, but that's an instance. And it's funny too, again, tying this back to this larger idea of being a Superman fan. This is an instance where Michael's not alone in loving this season. I see a lot of positivity about it on social media. Yeah. I've also had a number of chats with people offline who feel similarly to the way we do. So we're not alone, but overall it seems like there's a lot of positivity. Now, on the other hand, I've been in situations like with the Snyder movies where, yes, you have very ardent fans of that, but you also have people who are just as militant in their opposition to those films.
Oh, sure.
And I will say, I vastly prefer being in the camp of, liking something, even if a lot of other people don't, because I feel like, hey, I'm getting something out of this. I wish you did too, but it doesn't take away from my enjoyment that you don't. This bit with Superman and Lois, like, I hate being in this position as a Superman fan where I want nothing more than to love everything about this season of the show. And again, seeing other people getting out of it what I want to be getting out of it. Like it's my least favorite position to be in as a Superman fan. I find frustrating. And again, I'm not even saying I'm frustrated with the show. I mean, just like being a Superman fan, wanting to like something that I'm just
you want
not
to love the
there.
whole thing. You just want to come out of it enjoying it. And now the way, do I sound like Pollyanna saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. To me, when this show ends, even if I'm disappointed with the way it ended, at least I know that it's like, all right, I've got 3 really great seasons and 1 bummer season. It ended in a bummer, right? And I sound ridiculous saying this, but to me, it's like, and I probably have said this to you before too. It's like, oh, you're going to, what do you think of the Christopher Reeve movies? Well, I'm in the mood to watch Christopher Reeve, so I'm going to watch Superman 1 and 2. But I'm not really a fan of 3 and 4. I'm really not, but it's all we've got of Christopher Reeve. So I'm going to watch 3 and 4 because it's what I've got of Christopher Reeve. And even if they're not great movies, it's still Christopher Reeve as Superman. So I'm going to watch it. And it's kind of like how I feel about it. It's like, you got 2 great movies and you got 2 not so great movies. And it's what we've got of Christopher Reeve. Superman and Lois, I got 3 great seasons and 1 not so great season, but at least I got 3 great seasons. So that's the way I tried it. It's like when people say, you like the Rocky movies? Yeah, except the 5th one. It's like I got 1 through 4 and 6. And there are moments in 5, don't get me wrong. Not many, but that's really how I'm coming at it. And like I said, I'm not really this Pollyannish in life, but when it comes to this pop culture stuff, and especially these things I love, I guess I just try to put on a happy face or something. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's Pollyannish. I mean, I've now, I think, seen, and less so in terms of the people who come on the show, but I think more in terms of, and we have a wonderful community. And I would say by and large, the vast majority of people I've interacted with on social media, I think, have been diplomatic and open-minded, but you still encounter folks who, again, are like really set in their ways in terms of what they'll accept, what they gravitate towards. And again, it's just always kind of interesting to me. Circling back to the book, Superman, The Definitive History, one of the things I'm curious about, I mean, the fact that you did these 2 books in a relatively short amount of time back to back is really something. But
crazy.
just in terms of the process, right? Writing this unofficial oral history versus writing the definitive history and having the, I guess, official stamp of approval from DC Comics. I mean, process wise, how did the two experiences compare?
Well, I mean, when you're doing the unofficial history, and especially in an oral history, it's sort of, I guess you're not, you're really presenting history from the point of view of those who participated in it, in the sense of it's really their view of the history that you're telling, right? I mean, you're telling the history, you know the history, but they're the speakers, they're the ones who are telling the story. With an official book, it's history as prescribed by, they say history is told by the victors. Well, its history is told by the ones who are, right? I mean, victors is the only word I could think, but it's not, it wasn't a war. But they're the ones who own Superman, and they're the ones telling the official story. And so those voices are all in support of telling the official history of Superman. So it is a very interesting challenge, though, both sides of it, because unofficial lets it be a little more unvarnished. So you get to talk about certain things that maybe they don't want talked about in the official book. I mean, and that's just the way it is. I mean, I don't want to go into specifics of what could and couldn't be in the official and unofficial book, but I'm kind of losing track of that question.
No, just the experience writing the unofficial versus the definitive history. Just how the experience compared process wise.
Well, the experience, I mean, look, the unofficial book, I'm not going to lie. The unofficial book was, I mean, they're both a joy to work on and write, but unofficial, it's me sitting here putting the pieces together the way I see putting the pieces together, right? It's speaking to 250 people and putting that puzzle together in the form of an oral history, which is exactly a jigsaw puzzle is what an oral history is. And for me, it's a personal thrill doing it that way. I mean, oral history, if I had the opportunity never to write another book in a non-oral history format, I would be happy. I mean, it's just, I've done 14 of them so far, and it makes me very, very happy doing them. It's just great talking to people and telling that story in a linear fashion. And I think that's one of the big differences too. In the Voices from Krypton, I was telling the story essentially in linear, even if I would break out and say, okay, and now I'm covering the adventures of Superman, and then I'm going back into the comic book history, but it's all relatively in linear order. We're doing the 50s, we're now in the Silver Age of the comics, then we're in the Bronze Age of the comics, and then we're in the Christopher Reeve movies, and then we're and it goes back and forth between the two. Everything is progressing towards the present, essentially. The definitive history, the official book, was told basically, and I enjoyed this a lot, was being told in sections, in the sense of all the movies were in one chapter, all of the TV shows were in another chapter, all the video games were in another chapter, and each thing had its own chapter, whether it was merchandise or PSAs, cartoons, whatever it may be. And the comic books, of course, had a very extensive chapter, just the comic history itself with, Robert Greenberg did an amazing job piecing together. I don't know how you can weave together that entire history, but he did. And we would punctuate that with interviews that I had done, and it really came together beautifully. And so that it was a different approach from Voices from Krypton, because it was done in these sections, but that's what made it exciting, and it's so different from the other book. The two books read so differently from each other, and they have many different interviews from each other. And that's the beauty of it too. It's not, I don't want anyone to think for a second, it's like, well, he just took the interviews from Voices from Krypton and put them in. No, there are a ton of interviews in this new book that are just so different, and an opportunity to speak to Philip Kennedy Johnson a lot about his stuff in the comic history. And that was great. And Mark Waid, again, poor Mark, I drove him crazy. Talking about this.
He loves talking Superman just like we do.
He does. He's great. He's great. I was on a Zoom with him once, and I have a comic rack in this room I'm in, and on the rack are some old adventure comics with Legion of Superheroes, and he's nailing off the numbers or reading off the numbers of what issues they are based on the covers. And he's absolutely right. I'm turning around and looking at him, these 12-cent comics with with him nailing numbers. But anyway, that's a digression.
No, honestly, I do this very sparingly because I don't want to wear out my welcome. But anytime I have emailed him, like, he gets back to me or like right away. And I'm always deeply appreciative, and it's always surreal.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my God, like from Mark Waid.
Oh yeah.
I'm glad you brought up the organization of the book, because that's exactly where I wanted to go next. I found this particularly interesting. I think the borderline OCD collector in me and the podcast host in me with the spreadsheet and everything, I loved the organization of this, because a linear approach certainly could and would have worked, but I loved more of that thematic organization. And some of the kind of chapters or sub-chapters, there's one on the different varieties of kryptonite, right? Like that's a ton of fun. There's a section on the evolution of the shield, merchandise, like you said, the video games, as I mentioned before, radios, records, musicals, the prose novels. I have to say that chapter 5, radio, records, musicals, and then sort of, I guess, the subsection, the prose novels, that at this point, I think probably still represents the largest gap in my, I talk about this all the time, like gaps in my fandom, and we've been knocking them down over the course of 175 episodes, we're knocking them down. But I would say the radio show, like I said, the musical, these novels, the newspaper dailies as well, I would throw in there as well. Like those still kind of represent the biggest gaps in my fandom. For you at this point, what do you consider your remaining gaps, if any, at this point? Although I guess there's a distinction, right, between researching and writing about something versus necessarily reading or watching or listening to something, right? So you might have covered something, but it could still remain a gap in your fandom to some degree, I suppose.
I mean, the radio show is certainly a gap in the sense of having my biggest problem now, is time. I mean, time is, there's a line in Star Trek Generations with Malcolm McDowell says, "Time is the fire in which we burn," and that is true. And finding the time to go back and do these things is just like impossible. Working a full-time job and doing these things on the books on the side and stuff is really tough. But the radio show is certainly a big gap, because I mean, to be honest with you, I haven't listened to more than a handful of episodes of the radio show, and I really would love to, because it is great from what I've heard and what people have said, and from speaking to people about the radio show. As far as comics are concerned, unfortunately, there are huge gaps. I've gotten more listening to your show talking about a lot of these things that I have never been able to read, because, in the 60s and stuff, of course, I grew up, I read all the stuff in the 50s and the 60s and a good part of the 70s. Then I had to get out of comics for a while, and then I would dip in and out. But there are huge sections that I've never read that I don't know anything about. And that's where my biggest gap is. And I'd say in the comic book history, that's probably a lot of my biggest gap. But like, as far as like production and all that, no, I'd say I'm pretty up to date with all the different filmed versions and TV versions, animated versions, except for the radio show. That's sort of the one. But it's the comics. And again, will I ever have time to read the comics? I doubt it. I mean, it just, getting older, Anthony, I don't know if I'm going to have time to do thousands of comics. So I just don't think so. So we'll see.
It is quite a lot to dive into, for sure. I know
I'm always amazed when you've read all these things. I'm like, you say, "Oh yeah, I just did did my homework and I read that." I'm like, how the hell does this man have time to do this?
If I didn't have the passion for it, I would never be able to. But I think it's funny, because I just did a recording with a fellow Superman podcaster, Alan Burke, for my George Reeves show, and he made a similar comment about sort of my output and finding the time for it. And I was like, I guess I never realized how much pent up Superman talk I had in me, like all these years, despite spending years at my local comic shop. And we talked about all sorts of stuff, but it was rarely Superman, and it was never to this extent that we talk about here. So I think this is a lifetime of being a fan of this character, and like finally having this outlet where, in terms of the people I'm talking to and like all the people who listen to it, like it's all just kind of come together, and that kind of has fueled a lot. I wanted to ask you, I know you mentioned your co-writer, Bob Greenberger, tackling that comic section. In terms of the chapters that you were responsible for, what was the most challenging, and or what was the one that came easiest, so to speak?
Well, I mean, challenging for me was like I did the PSA chapter, and that was hard because it was like that was really researching and trying to reach out to people to talk. And I was lucky; I found the people who were behind, like Superman warning foreign countries about mines exploding and hurting children and stuff, and things like that, and digging into that, and also the video games. Finding people, I had some bizarre encounters with people who are involved with the video games. I don't want to mention names, but one person who I was told, "Oh, he'll love to talk to you about it," and I got on Zoom with him, and his reaction after I said, "Well, let me hit record," and he's like, "Wait a minute, is this an interview?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." He goes, "I didn't know we were doing an interview." He said, "I thought you were going to ask questions. I was to give you information." I was like, "Well, it's kind of the definition of an interview, but no, okay." And that didn't go anywhere. But just a very bizarre thing. In any case, I would say the video games and the PSAs, because again, these are areas where I just knew nothing. I mean, the video games especially, because once video games progressed behind, little Sega things, I was beyond. When my kids were beyond me, and I was kind of out of the loop with the games. Those were really difficult. As far as the easy ones, like I said, Bob really did the comic stuff, and he did a phenomenal job. And he also did stuff on Smallville and things like that, or Superboy. And the easy stuff was really much of that stuff. Just I know all the production stuff so well that stuff is like second nature to me. It's like I've written about it for 40 years. I mean, I've been writing about Superman since I became a journalist, and so I've studied that history, and I've interviewed people about Superman for all these years. So every time a new version came up, I was always covering it. So I had a very good working knowledge of all that stuff.
Gotcha. I have to say, it's funny with the video games. So I had not been a gamer for decades, essentially. And then I replayed the Death and Return of Superman video game for an episode that we did a couple of years ago. And I got an emulator and I played it on my computer, and it was amazing. And then about a year ago, we bought a Nintendo Switch, and I played a few games with my son. Essentially, he just watches me play. I try to get him to play, but he just watches at this point. But we just got Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Shredder's Revenge, which is like a classic side-scrolling game like I played when I was younger. And huge Power Rangers fan. They just announced a release date for a game called Rita's Rewind. And it's, again, just kind of like a classic 90s style side-scrolling Power Rangers video game. And I could not be more excited. And again, on the Superman front, though, that Death and Return game, you talk about, funny enough, going back to Superman and Lois, you talk about certain expectations when the story is tackled in another form. That game delivered. That game gave you Doomsday. It gave you the 4 replacement Superman. I was very pleased with that. But yeah, that's a lot of fun. And I still have a lot of work to do kind of on that video game front. But the book, I think one of the things that's so impressive about it is it really is all of that other material, the photos especially. It really just brings the book to life. But I'm impressed by the breadth and depth that you guys were able to achieve. Was there anything that you really had? I know it's a hefty book and you got quite a lot in there. Was there anything you had to sacrifice, or anything in particular that you wanted more space for, but you just had to draw the line at a certain point?
We were talking about doing an extensive section on Superman Lives, and that was going to have a lot of cool production art from the Tim Burton version, which the great thing about that movie is it never got made, but the wonderful thing too is the great art that exists from it. And it's always better to think what could have been than what we would have gotten had it actually been made. But what could have been, image wise, was very fascinating, and it's some really great art. But they had to draw the line somewhere. The book was so big as it was, and that was decided that we were going to hold off on that and not put that in there. And that sort of was, I think, the biggest sacrifice. It was like, let's focus on the projects that were made rather than anything that wasn't. Because we were looking at different projects, Justice League Mortal. We were looking at different things, Superman Flyby, different things that sort of looked like they were going to go. And there was all this great production art on. But ultimately, we decided let's stick with projects that were actually made, just because the thing was already so long. And it just couldn't go. It just couldn't go any further. This book would never be finished, and I'm used to that with these things. Usually, you have to pull these things out of my hands. As they say, you have to pull out of my dead hands before I let it go. I know I'm always like any of these books. I'm always writing into the last possible minute. It's like, no, I'm not done yet. Yes, you are. Give me the damn book. That kind of thing.
I hear
So,
you. And I think that's why I kind of like having a weekly release schedule for the podcast, because it's like, come Tuesday, it goes out,
right.
and I never put out
it takes discipline. I mean, it really does.
but it's like, and I never put out an episode that I'm not content with. But at the same time, it's like, again, if you have infinite time, you could tinker forever, or second guess yourself, or just forever be working on it. But yeah, that deadline, that's kind of that, that hard line that you have there. So and maybe tying a lot of this together and bringing us home, the opening line of the panel that I pitched was, as a new incarnation of Superman prepares to take flight in James Gunn's forthcoming film, which promises to draw from the character's vast 86-year mythology, journey through that history with two lifelong fans who chronicled it. And then it went from there. But that was the opening line. And
Nice.
I think this will remain to be seen when we actually get to watch the movie. But it does seem, I think my instinct, you tell me if you disagree, it does feel like, hell, even just in the costume alone, you see elements from various different interpretations of Superman kind of coming together in that costume there. The Kingdom Come S and the yellow S on the cape and the New 52 style collar and the classic red trunk. So, I mean, maybe I'm extrapolating too much, but I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if the movie itself kind of draws from a lot of what's come before in various ways. I guess my first question is that something that you welcome? Do you feel like there's any risk in the film not being enough of its own thing? Or do you think, no, it can kind of still blend a lot of what's come before, but also still stand on its own?
I think we've seen the danger of being too much of a slave to the past with Superman Returns. I mean, that was way too much of a risk because it was too much. As much as I love the Donner film, it was too much, and I think most people would agree that it just too much blood relative to that movie. Then you go to Man of Steel, and whatever its virtues are, it is so different from anything that came before that it was a turnoff to a lot of people. This is like just not Superman as far as a lot of people were concerned. I think the idea of meeting somewhere in the middle of sort of giving us the thing we know, and yet certain elements that maybe we don't know, or if they're from the comics, the mainstream movie audience will not know. I don't care how popular Kingdom Come is in the comic books. The mainstream movie audience, for the most part, is not going to know anything about it. I mean, they're just simply not. So by taking elements from the sort of from different places, as long as it looks good, it doesn't look patchwork, and it doesn't, and the approach doesn't feel patchwork. Like I'm expecting an earnest Superman movie, but not a heavy Superman movie, if you know what I mean. Like I'm not expecting like an angst-driven Superman like Zack Snyder gave us with Henry Cavill. And I'm not expecting a campy Superman movie either. I'm expecting somewhere in the middle where it's going to be earnest. He's going to have the values that Superman we want Superman to have, that beacon of hope thing, even if it takes him part of the movie to get to that being that beacon of hope, maybe. But I really do think that. I think he's going to land somewhere in the middle of all these different versions, basically encompassing what we need him to encompass without being sort of like, who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose? He'll know his purpose, I think, to some degree anyway.
Yeah. No, I agree with that assessment and that prediction. I think that's likely where it will land. And I think that's probably where it should land, right? You know, you laid out two examples, right, of movies that went in different directions and the reactions that those elicited. And so I think maybe something that's a little bit somewhere in between might resonate more with people. But kind of building off of that. So, and this was kind of what I was thinking about in terms of being a fan, following the S, thinking about the history of the character. A big question, but bear with me, and we've cited a bunch of different interpretations of Superman, even just in this discussion, and obviously your book goes through everything, but what aspects, I'll just use that word, like what aspects from past tellings of the Superman legend do you hope come back around or get amplified in either Gunn's movie or subsequent tellings? Like, are there things that, when we look at this history of the character and the evolution of the character, are there things that we've seen that maybe have gone away or have been diminished that, again, you would like to see come back or get amplified? And
Well, that's interesting.
I'll go first because I didn't ask you this ahead of time, and I want to give you a second to let it marinate. But for me, I have a few things, but I think about the chemistry between Lois and Clark. And I would kind of argue, especially when we're looking at these other media adaptations, in my mind, and again, people might feel differently, but in my mind, I look at Lois and Clark and I look at Smallville as two instances where you really felt the heat between those performers and the characters they are embodying.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't know that I've really seen that elsewhere. As Superman and Lois, I think could, but I think that show is relatively somber and they're dealing with such heavy subject matter most of the time that I don't know that there's always such an avenue for that. There's a chemistry there, but again, it comes out differently. But I think really in terms of that heat, that sexual tension between the characters, again, I look at Lois and Clark, I look at Smallville, and it's just such a dynamic quality in that relationship. And that's something that I would kind of like to see, something more in the vein of what we had seen in those prior interpretations, whether it's in this new Gunn movie or beyond. So like that's something for me that kind of comes to mind. So when I ask this question, if there are specific sort of plot points, that's certainly a valid answer. But I'm kind of thinking of it more in terms of like this bigger picture, more like spiritual sense, more of the thematics as opposed to like the, again, specific plot details.
Yeah, I mean the Lois thing is a good point. I mean, one of the things I love that Philip Kennedy Johnson did in his at the end of his War World saga was when one of the kids opened the closet and there was the War World suit in there, and he realized that Soups was dressing up, during his sexcapades with Lois, like it's just a hot thing wearing this outfit, and I love that because it just established their sex life basically in a good way that was really good. So I thought that was really interesting. They haven't really gotten away from this, but certainly you didn't really get it in the Snyder films, and I guess you get it to some degree in Superman and Lois, but the whole thing again with the Kents and their influence on Clark, and you don't really get that in Superman and Lois, that it was their influence that made Clark who he is, and I think that is such an important part of that character, even if that came into the mythos later on, that that they made him who he is. And certainly Smallville did that. I mean, that Jonathan's, the relationship between John Schneider's Jonathan and Tom Welling's Clark really encapsulated, I think, in a beautiful way. I mean, Jeff East and Glenn Ford did a beautiful job too, I think, in an encapsulated version of that in Superman the movie. But that to me has become such an important part of that character that I want to see that, whether they're alive or not. Jonathan's alive or not. I would hope he would be in this first movie. At least let's have some time with him to get to experience this Jonathan. I don't remember if he's been cast in this movie or not.
He has, yeah.
He has. All right. So Jonathan's in this movie. And let's hope it would be nice if he stuck around a little bit for it. But to have that relationship, maybe not. You obviously don't agree.
I want him to be around. I just don't think he will. I think this will be.
Yeah.
But we'll see.
We'll see what happens. Do something different. Keep him around for one movie. But that point is that because if they have instilled in him the thing that makes him that beacon of hope, if he's the one who can see the betterment of humanity because of how he was raised, I want to know that. I want to see that element as part of him. That's really something I think is so integral to the character, and I hope that's included in some form.
I co-sign on that. And I guess kind of building off of it, one of the other really kind of foundational things that I want, and again, and we're talking about in terms of the Gunn movie, I think maybe that's the vehicle for this part of our discussion, but if it's not this Gunn movie, whatever comes next. But I want the proceedings to be more personal. I want to dig in more into those interpersonal dynamics. We know we're going to have a Perry White in this movie. I would love if there's more than just Perry barking orders and being annoyed and frustrated with his staff. It's like, I've seen this so many freaking times. And I feel like there's a path, I don't know, show some mentorship between Perry and Clark or Jim. Similarly, I love this actor they've cast for Jimmy Olsen in this movie. I would love some moments of genuine friendship between Clark and Jim, and not him just being like a little kid following after him. Again, we just had Carlin and Jurgens, and we talked about how fundamental that supporting cast was in the Triangle era of comics. And it's something that they're dabbling in again in the comics right now. They don't have the real estate, I think, to really dig in as much as I would like them to, but at least they're attempting it. But they're in the comics right now, like rounding out the Daily Planet staff a bit more. And Perry's running for mayor and he's working out of Bibbo's bar. And it's like, that's the stuff I want to see. And especially if we're looking at whatever James Gunn's master vision is. I don't always mean to sound so sarcastic when I say it. Whatever James Gunn's master vision is.
Much less sarcastic. That was better.
Thank you. Presumably we're looking at multiple Superman movies. So, maybe this is something that can grow over time. And I know limited runtime and we have to focus on our primary characters.
Many characters in this movie.
And there are already a lot of characters. But yeah, I would just love to just spend some more time with the characters and just explore different dynamics or different sides of a relationship than we see. Because I think it's easy to kind of fall into the standard Perry White's gruff and he's barking orders and he's skeptical. It's like, all right, but what else? Like, what else can you do with this character?
Yeah.
Again, like in the comics, he's running for mayor right now. I don't know. That's great. Maybe that's something that could be part of this movie. Maybe that could be in the background of other movies, like a Perry White's mayoral campaign. I don't know. But that's like one of the things that I would really like, because I think that helps us invest. I more and more the kind of world ending or multiversal ending stakes are fine, but it's not what really lights my fire as much.
Well, I think people are also burned out a little bit on that whole, those superhero tropes. You know what I mean? With the whole galactic threat thing. We don't know who the enemy is in this. Is it Brainiac? Is it somebody else? We don't know what it is. But I do think, though, having those human moments would make it a lot better. A lot more. One of the things I liked about, you talk about like Perry White, for instance, one of the things I liked about Superman Returns, believe it or not, was Frank Langella's version of Perry, where he was this sort of more mellow. Well, what are you doing, people? Move. You know what I mean? Rather than, yo, Kent, you know what I mean? It was this whole calm Perry White. It was so different. It made you look at him because it was like this calm voice in the newsroom, right? The one calm voice. I thought that was such an interesting approach. Not really a character thing you're talking about, but I just thought that was different.
Yeah, but at least it was an attempt at something different. I guess this is as good a point as any to bring in one of our patron questions. Jan asked this question about Metropolis. What's your favorite Metropolis in TV and film? It doesn't always have as much personality as, say, Gotham City, but I think Smallville is one of the more fleshed out portrayals outside the comics, as much as it looked like a cheap backlot set in the final few seasons. Do you have a favorite sort of, visual representation on screen of Metropolis?
Boy, I don't know. I don't think I've ever given that thought, to tell you the truth. That's the truth, because absolutely right about the backlot thing. And both Lois and Clark and Smallville, they look like backlots. There's nothing special about them really, as far as I can think of. And Superman, the movie, was New York City, basically. I'm sorry. I don't really have a good Metropolis answer for that.
You know what though? And I've been thinking about Jan's question, and I don't know that I really have a good one either. Again, like with Lois and Clark and Smallville, they did what they could, but you can't escape the fact that you're on that lot. Like when Clark and Doomsday have their fight on the street of Metropolis, season 8 finale. But I've made my peace with that. But you know what? I'm going to be cautiously optimistic about the new movie. And maybe that might be my favorite, because we've seen from a lot of those set photos, just from a set deck perspective, it really seems like they've created a lot of these storefronts, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know, it seems, and I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, like they're trying to give their version of the city a little bit more character, make it a little bit more distinct, make it a little more Metropolis specific. So maybe this will be the version. I don't know that we've really, like, if I had to pick just based on what we've had so far, I'd probably go Lois and Clark.
Superman, the animated series. think about the
Yeah.
futuristic Metropolis. That just something popped into my head, but I don't know, man. Maybe Lois and Clark, but again, there wasn't much of it. I mean, that's the problem. It's like nothing. There's nothing that stands out in terms of representation of Metropolis in any of these things. Yeah, you get the Daily Planet with the globe spinning, and that's like the biggest aspect of Metropolis we ever really get, as far as my memory is going of these things.
We had another patron question, not related to this, but while we're answering patron questions, this is from Brent Bergen, who asks, what piece of media, to the best of your knowledge, has the most Superman, i.e. screen time, page time, etc.? What has the most, quote unquote, Superman of it all, whether comics or other media, off the top of your head? This is not off the top of my head because he sent in this question a while ago. I don't know that I really have. I don't know that I really have an answer.
I don't even know if I understand the question. What is the question?
Yeah, I guess the story that where again Superman has the most presence in terms of screen time or page time. I mean, I guess the answer would have to be the comics, because I feel like, and even that's a very vague answer because the comics are over 8 decades, but
86 years worth of comics.
Yeah. But I feel like when you're looking at any of these, certainly live action adaptations, there's always going to be, he's not going to be in every scene, right? Because that's not practical from a production standpoint, and you want to service other characters. So I feel like the answer would have to be somewhere in the realm of the comics.
Yeah, I'm not to take the easy way out, but I think that's absolutely the right answer, because Superman could be featured on every page, and yeah, I'm sorry, there's not a better answer.
I don't know. Yeah, if anyone out there has a better answer to that, I guess other things that I would love to see amplified or come back. When we look at the evolution of the character, I think one of the things that comes up all the time, right, is the fact that he begins in the Depression era as this champion of the oppressed, this social crusader. And then really within a few years, you see the shift into the symbol of the status quo and the patriotic symbol, truth, justice, and the American way, and all of that. The champion of the oppressed aspect, that's something that I would love to see get a resurgence. And I know Grant Morrison kind of got there with the New 52 Action Comics run, certainly at the very beginning. Yeah. I do feel like it relatively quickly moved away from that. I feel like we really could have lived in that space for a lot longer. But that's something, and I feel like today more than ever, right, we need somebody to question and sometimes challenge authority and stand up for the little guy and do what's right, even if it's not what the people in charge say it is. I feel like there's space for that, and that's something that I think would be really interesting to see play out.
But I wonder if Superman can do that today, given what he's come to represent and how he's evolved. Can he sort of be that guy just standing up for the oppressed when now he's become sort of this universal symbol of hope? That's how we look at him, right? I mean, that's how he's considered, is that symbol of hope, that beacon of light in the darkness. And I'm not saying standing up for the oppressed isn't being a beacon of light in the darkness, but that's sort of becomes a universal symbol, rather than like, he has a wife beater, and he'll stop a wife beater. Don't get me wrong. I mean, he'll still stop a wife beater, or what's the cliche they always go to? A corrupt, a slumlord and a corrupt, whatever warden. I'm not saying he wouldn't stop those things, but I wonder if you can do that now. I'd almost think you could do that if you're doing a period piece again. It might be fun to go back and do a period version of Superman where he's back in those days, taking on those things again. I don't know, though. I mean, that might be a silly idea, but that sort of just popped in my head.
No, a period piece could be really cool, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's some space for something like that. And I mean, I feel like it accomplishes a couple. I feel like he still can be that symbol of hope. I mean, I think if it's sticking up for people who need a hand, right? Standing up to a bully, even if sometimes that bully is the establishment, and hand in hand with that, it also, I think, helps combat that tired criticism of the character that we don't that we don't buy into, but that the character's boring or whatever you want to call it. It's like,
please.
no, like he can really kind of mix it up. So
absolutely.
I don't
Like
know.
if somebody looked at him and said they're eating the dogs, he could come down and say, sorry.
No, but yeah, I mean, and this episode will come out on election day, so that's very appropriate. But you know, we talked about this years ago now when we surveyed the pre-crisis tellings of the origin and how it evolved. And it was so striking to me in one of the Golden Age retellings. There's this bit about Superman destroying tenements on his own, of his own volition. Flash forward to one of the tellings in the Silver Age, and he was knocking down the buildings at the behest of the mayor, right? And you see how things have shifted over those years in the comics as Superman's role in the real world had changed. And so, yeah, I don't know, like that's an aspect that I would love. And then hand in hand with that, and what you said about a period piece, and going back to what we were saying before about George Reeves, and I would say there's been a lot of discovery for me over the course of filling in these gaps over these past few years, and the George Reeves show might be one of the most striking instances of that. I mean, again, it inspired a whole other podcast series because it's, you know, that was something that I really had like next to no exposure to, and I was just so taken with that no nonsense interpretation of the character and the frustrated impatience that George Reeves played Clark and Superman with. He did. And I don't know, like that's another aspect where a little bit of that Reeves energy could go a long way for me in kind of a modern interpretation of the character. Maybe he doesn't need to throw as many punches at civilians as that Superman did in season 1, but yeah, like that's another thing that I would kind of be happy to see come back around.
Yeah. You know what's interesting? I mean, this is sort of going off on a tangent on this Reeves thing, but in all the interviews I did with people for Voices from Krypton, especially, a lot of the things people point out is that they said that the common theme was that George Reeves represented a father figure to them. And I found that so interesting that of all the Supermen, like with Christopher Reeve, the common comments I got from people was like, A, he stepped off the comic page, or B, everybody commented on, you see that transformation from Clark Kent into Superman when he takes off his glasses and he stands up in Lois's apartment, and oh my God, look at that transformation. But with Christopher Reeve, it was always, he felt like a father. And he would wink at us at the end of the episode, and he knew that we knew his secret, but nobody else did.
George Reeves.
And these were the two, George Reeves, that's what I meant. Yeah, that was the difference between those two Supermen. And I just found that fascinating because he's the only Superman that anybody in all the interviews I've done have said, oh, he was like a father figure to me. When I would watch him, I felt like, that's what it was. I thought that was so interesting.
I agree. There is that paternal sense that comes across. And that show, more than anything else that we talk about, except maybe the animated series, clearly aimed at a younger audience. And, I have talked to or have seen comments from so many folks, whether it was initially in the 50s or watching reruns in the 60s or 70s or whatnot, who grew up as kids watching it. And I think, they really view him in that way, in a way that other fans do not view other interpretations of the character. Like, it is very specific. And what I mentioned a second ago about that frustrated impatience that George Reeves played the character with, that too is so unique, I think, to that show. I mean, I really can't think of another Superman / Clark Kent performance in that vein. And he had other sides to the character. I don't want to make it sound like this guy was like a hothead in every episode, but it was really specific. And so I think in terms of his take on the character, and I think that the age of the majority of the people who watched it at a very formative time, I think it really just kind of coalesced in this paternal view that, again, feels very much belonging to that show and nothing else.
And no other version.
Yeah.
Right. No other
version. I know.
So
it's really interesting. And I think it's, this is more really about the other show, but it's like, I always try to tread carefully. I don't want to dump on the episodes that we talk about too much because I know people have very strong feelings about them. But I think what I find more and more, I think people just have so much love for George, right? It transcends like, an individual episode. It's like, it's just so much love for that performer and that version of the character, and it just transcends. It's anything.
Not militant, but they don't care about Superman. They care about George Reeves as Superman. And I found that repeatedly when I was, again, doing interviews. It was like, no, no, just George Reeves. That's all. Well, who's your other favorite? No, no, no other favorites. Just George Reeves
Yeah.
as Superman. It's not even the character. It's George Reeves as Superman. That is the character as far as they're concerned.
So I think I've hit everything I kind of wanted to share about, and I mean, I certainly could go on, but in terms of really just those core, just kind of a few core things that I would love to see, very elemental things. Again, those interpersonal dynamics, the supporting cast, the chemistry, the champion of the oppressed, like those are things. Is there anything else that kind of comes to mind from your perspective?
No, I mean, I kind of wish they weren't doing Lex Luthor again. It's like Luthor's been played out, in my opinion, but maybe it'll be brilliant. Who knows? But no, I mean, my main thing is just getting that sense of what makes Superman or Clark. That's really the big thing that I want to make. I really want to see in this. I really want to get a sense of that. So it's not just like, hey, I'm Superman. I mean, I really want to get a sense of the man. Like we would get in some of these interpretations. It's the only thing that comes to mind because most of them, I think, have the basics are usually show up in these things, but that's something that could get lost very easily, in the trappings of the fact that we've got all these other heroes in this movie and we've got, a lot of stuff going on. So I don't know how that's all going to translate, but I have to have enough faith that James Gunn knows how much is riding on this movie. And these characters would not be in this movie if he felt it didn't fit, if they didn't fit. That's my hope. I mean, we'll see, but there is so much riding on this movie in terms of DC's future in the movies. So we'll see.
Very true. I actually did have one last thing. Clark as Superboy. It's time. Enough time has passed. I want to see this get a proper spin in the modern era, whatever medium it lands in. I think there's space for it. I'm not saying every new telling needs to incorporate it, but I'm saying that I would like to see this given a spin again for the first time in a long time. So I'm going to add that to my list too.
So that we'll see like footage of a young Superman, basically a Superboy in Smallville.
And look, he has Crypto.
Hey, I would have zero problem with that. I used to love that comic.
He has Crypto in this movie, maybe a little bit of a flashback. I feel like
that's one thing I'm happy about is Crypto. For some reason, that makes me very happy. I don't know why.
I hear you. And I feel like, look, if you're telling a story about his debut as Superman, maybe you might not have Superboy. That could undermine your story. But this, from everything we've gathered, is a story, this movie, where Superman is already into his career and established.
Yeah.
Maybe there's space for a flashback. But I know most people would probably disagree with that. But after the journey I've been on with Clark as Superboy, I just think it deserves an outing again in the modern era. And I would be curious to see whether, again, it's in this movie or some sort of animated project or in the comics, wherever it might be, that there's storytelling potential that I think could really be mined there. So I'll add that. Now, I'm going to include, of course, the link to the book in the show notes. Is there anything else about Superman, the Definitive History that you want to share, or anything we didn't talk about that you want to?
Really, I think we've covered the book pretty well, but just want to say to people once again that it's appropriately titled The Definitive History. It really is incredible. It's a beautiful package. It is certainly worth, it's a very expensive book. It's a collector's item for a reason, but it is unlike any book on Superman that's ever been published before, or is likely to be again for a very long time, I think. So I would just say it is available for pre-order now. It's coming out November 26th. And I will do another self-plug saying that Voices from Krypton is also available. I might as well mention that's out there too. That's an oral history, and it's a very different reading experience from Superman, the Definitive History. So it's, but I don't think anybody picking up this book, the new one, will either, hopefully, would be disappointed. I think if you're a Superman fan, I think you'll get a heck of a lot out of it. And if you're not, you'll learn a lot. It's just so encompassing. It really is.
Yeah, well, really, congratulations, and I hope everyone checks it out. And I have to say, I was so pleasantly surprised when I was reading through the Definitive History, and there was a section on the Triangle Era and the Jeff Loeb, Joe Kelly portion of that. And there was a 13th Dimension article that was quoted in there. The author was not named, but the article was cited. And I was reading through all of this about Joe Kelly's Action Comics run, and I was like, I agree with this. I said, I would say that. And I said, you know what? I think I did say that.
You did?
That was my article. So I made it into that book as well. I was very honored and pleasantly surprised. And of course, honored to be in the Voices from Krypton book amongst all these other huge names. It's really surreal. So, I appreciate being included. And I appreciate you coming on here and having this conversation. This was fun. I every now and then to kind of do, obviously, yes, we're talking about the book specifically, but just generally, just kind of talking about being a Superman fan and some of these bigger picture ideas. I enjoy, and hopefully the audience does as well. So thank you.
No, absolutely. And thanks for having me. It's always fun to come on this. It really is, just to sit here and talk about this stuff. It's a nice opportunity to do so. And I enjoy it so much. So that never goes away.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Ed. Thank you, audience. Make sure you come back next week for another all new episode. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This podcast is made possible by the support of our Patreon community. Sign up for a monthly or annual membership at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato and choose from a range of rewards. This week, I want to spotlight our Daily Planet Bullpen tier, available for $1 a month or $10 for the year. Members at this level are the first to know about upcoming coverage and get to submit a comment or question to be read during the episode. Sign up today, and thank you to all patrons. This podcast is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP to save 10% on your order. That's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions. It helps support the show, too. Be sure to check out our sister podcast series, Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, an episode-by-episode breakdown of the classic George Reeves television show, available wherever you get podcasts. Please join us on social media, become a patron, and subscribe, rate, and review today. Links are in the show notes. Thank you all.